Okay, welcome everybody to yet another Google Hangout for the Contract Management MOOC. I'm delighted to be joined today by Justin Sadler-Smith, Tim Cummings, and by Kingsley Martin. I will ask each of them to introduce themselves to you in just a moment. So our live chat today is covering the topic of the impact of technology on contracting. It's a hot topic at the moment. It's something that we touched on last week when we did the Google Hangout with our graduates to the commercial and contract management field. So it's going to be really interesting to carry on that conversation now. If you do have any questions, I believe that the live chat on YouTube is not working. So if you do have any questions, then please submit them using Twitter, using the hashtag FLContracts. And also you can submit questions via FutureLearn as well. So without further ado, Kingsley, I will pass to you first of all to make your introduction.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to this MOOC. I'm Kingsley Martin. I am the president and founder of KM Standards and a new company called K-Reveal. I'm an ex-lawyer, a self-taught programmer, and an entrepreneur. My technology background is mostly around the analysis of contracts in order to create standards, to automate the drafting, to automate the review, and the management of these agreements. So I'm very much looking forward to participating in this MOOC. Thank you.
Thank you, Kingsley. Justin, let's pass to you.
So, hi everybody, I'm Justin Sadler-Smith. I'm responsible for the contract management and procurement solutions business for IBM over here in Europe. And I've been in this space around 20 years. I can't believe it's 20 years, but it's actually 20 years. And seen a lot of comings and goings around the technology field and how it's matured in the contract space itself. And also very, very keen to see how the function itself has been progressing over the last, I would say, 5 years in particular, and its use and adoption of technology to be able to assist it. So hence this actual, this movie is very, very interesting to me. I'm very happy to be invited to put some thoughts across as to where we at IBM see technology adopting and being supporting of the function moving forward. I'm not an ex-lawyer. I'm an ex-policeman. So I don't know if that counts or not, but it certainly may help in some contractual negotiation points as well. So that's good.
Well, I guess at least there's an extension of the law.
Extension of the law, yes. But maybe I can enforce some of the law. But
Tim.
So, Tim Cummings, I'm Chief Executive of ICCM, and we, of course, as an association, are very much focused on how do organizations and individuals structure and manage better trading relationships. How do they get better outcomes? And one of the things that fascinates us is the fact that so much of the complexity of today's operational environment is in fact being created by the emergence of a myriad of new technologies, whether it's social networking or whether it's business systems, or of course whether it's some of the side products of all of that, areas like something big in the news, cybersecurity. And we see the environment in which contracts are undertaken still really lagging massively behind. So in a way, the contracting process, and many of those who are practicing contracts, whether they're lawyers, contracts managers, procurement experts, whatever, are, in, I think, many ways almost today the victims of technology rather than the effective users of it. So I think we'll be exploring today a lot of the question of how do we catch up.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And in fact, I've just hot-footed it from a UK ICCM member meeting here in London today. And funnily enough, one of the questions that was posed to me at the meeting today was, how is it even possible to predict what technology is going to, the impact that technology is going to have in the world of commercial and contract management? So Kingsley, I'm going to pose that question to you. How is it possible to predict this?
I think there are two main focuses of the technology in this space. The first, of course, is automation itself. Yeah. And we're automating the key tasks. The tasks of creating standards, drafting contracts, reviewing contracts, and managing them. But I think the other piece that I think is equally critical to this step forward is the standardization of the contracts themselves. Most of the agreements that we execute have been done, quite frankly, a million times before. We can learn from that precedent, and we can provide those standards both as content and as modular components inside a technology. So one of the themes I think that we can sort of project going forward as to how it might evolve is, today we live in a world of human expert drafting contracts to be managed and reviewed and negotiated by other human experts. I think the next step that we will see is some machine capability, humans and machines working together to more efficiently automate the process. And we can envision even a third stage of machine-to-machine contracting. But that, I suspect, is some way off. But those are like the steps. Today we do it completely with experts. Step 2, a greater proportion done with machines. And we can think of a future that may even be completely machine-driven. But that's only in that third stage is some way to go.
Yeah, thank you. Justin, Tim mentioned, and I think we all do feel this to a degree, that technology within commercial and contract management is lagging behind within the legal community as well. Would you say that that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of people who believe that actually technology is not going to impact them in any way, shape, or form?
So I think there's a historical answer to this first, which is technology. You've heard me say this before, so this is not revolutionary. But the reality is that technology has really failed to keep up with the vision and the requirements of the contract management function. I would say probably over the last 20 years, and certainly the time I've been involved. But the major issue here, I think, is how it's now changing. And my position now clearly sees that technology is not only caught up, but it's actually dictating the future, in my view. You talked about the word predictive. I know my eyebrows came up at that point. Because when you think about predictive, we are very much focused on this whole cognitive thinking area. And not just us, but we're clearly driving that. But the cognitive thinking area, the predictive area, and how that can be incorporated into the contract process itself. And what I think will happen and what we'll see happen, and is already happening to some degree as well, is the adoption of these tools is going to be far greater than it ever was before, outside of just the focus core management, contract management function and the legal profession. You're going to have people operating this very much on the mobiles, on the apps, on iPads, whatever. You'll see people approving things. It'll move away from a core group of people utilizing what in the past has been quite difficult technology to utilize. It's something far more simple, a lot more pictorial, a lot more sort of user-friendly for people to actually utilize. And therefore, you're going to have far more people using technology, and you're going to have far more people, therefore, impacting upon a decision to an organization, to a corporation in real time, not based on historical data, which is probably out of date from 6 weeks ago or 6 months ago even. So you're going to see people having a much bigger impact, and therefore the skill sets are going to have to change as well as a consequence of that. So I think it's the most important inflection point for the function that I've seen for 20 years, because I think it's moving away from a core group of people to a much larger audience, and therefore the skill set's going to change as a consequence of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's very exciting stuff.
I think you raised a really good point as well, in that, and I know from speaking to many members of our community that one of the biggest challenges they've had is essentially putting the business case together for any kind of technology because of the complexity and the expense. So I think you do raise a really good point that in fact, it needs to change. We have to make it more intuitive, and we have to make it more readily available in order for it to be adopted. So, Tim, there is a lot of predictions in the media about how technology is going to impact our community, the commercial and contract management community. How do we embrace that technology and the impact of the technology without instilling a fear in people that they're just going to lose their jobs?
Yeah. And of course, as you know, the challenge of job loss, of course, goes well beyond this particular community.
Yes.
It's, of course, the forecast across many, many different job areas. My feeling is that certainly it's going to change our jobs, and I think Kingsley touched on this point when he was speaking at the beginning. I think very clearly there will be growing automation of many of the routine aspects of contract oversight and production. The machines will be able to predict far more accurately what combinations of terms and conditions are appropriate in particular circumstances. You know, I think where I get most excited actually is the analytical component of this mass of data that can look at portfolios of contracts and can get us out of the syndrome today of individual judgment on individual transactions. It's rather like medical diagnostics, where we're beginning to see how things like Watson and artificial intelligence are beginning to supplant the expert in medicine, because they are so much more accurate in doing diagnostics. And we're going to see that same sort of thing coming in with contracting. But what does that say? Well, it does suggest that a lot of the more administrative and underlying activities that are undertaken today will become much more subject to technology.
And I don't think that's going to impact upon jobs. I think it's going to impact upon skill set.
It's going to impact on the nature of the job. So I think where this takes us is obviously the jobs that are going to survive are those that the machines can't easily do. And what are those? Well, those are things where you're exercising more in the way of judgment. They're things where you need to perhaps understand human emotion. They're things where you need to understand areas perhaps of cultural influence. So I think there are a whole range of much more advanced activities, because today we know that we talked about it on this program, a very high proportion of contracts today underperform. Clearly, it is in the interests of everybody throughout the world that we cut the waste of underperforming contracts. These agreements are actually fundamental to human wealth, such as global economy. So the more that we can deliver better contracts, the better off we all are as individuals. And that is going to be a mix of automation and animation. And the animation piece, as you rightly say, Justin, is going to be much more focused around judgment, leadership, analytical skills. The beauty of contracts is that they cover a myriad of stakeholders and different people's interests. And we've talked about that on this program too. And machines are going to find it, I think, very difficult to take a myriad of different perspectives from engineers, project managers, from the general public, from politicians, from regulation, and really be able to make sense of what all that means in terms of the judgment of the type of relationship and structure that needs to be built.
And I think it's fair to say, of course, that we talk a lot about the challenge that organisations have, that contract users have, that complex contracts are put together, and then the delivery against those contracts is extremely hard because of the complex nature. So it does go to say that if there is some kind of automation and support, some technological support for the management of those obligations, then it is going to support our human endeavour. Kingsley, do you have a thought about that?
Well, I have to agree with the discussion that as we move to greater automation, and particularly this moving away from, and I felt this is my career, which is moving away from negotiating one transaction for one client to managing entire portfolios with technology, then one of the key things that's happening here is that we're really expanding the skill sets needed. Not just traditional legal practice, not just traditional contract management, but also technology and analytics. And I agree with the discussion that when it comes to analyzing large volumes of agreements, the technology is clearly in a fantastic position to do so. It's a tool that can read hundreds of thousands of agreements. And we can look at those analysis in terms of negotiation and behavior, in terms of compliance, in terms of cost and value. And the machine can and is in fact doing that. I agree that there are limits to the technology too. And that major limitation, of course, is relationships and relationship management and understanding the human interactions that are an integral part of this entire process. And that's the reason why we're not going to see wholesale replacement of the contracting process by machines, even in sometime in the future. We're still automating business relationships, and that's still a very humanistic thing. But I think this is a key piece here, is that in the past this was almost entirely run by lawyers, and now we're going to see these additional skill sets be brought into it.
You know, Sally, if I nail that point, one of the very active discussions on the message board has been around contract management, procurement, and is contract management just a sub-element of procurement, and et cetera, et cetera. I think what we're envisaging here, and where I think technology is really taking us, if you think about, for example, the whole sales process, increasingly businesses and individuals are using technology and eliminating the sales rep. And I think just the same, and a number of academics have been making the same observation, I think just the same as procurement. It's a very automatable activity. Undertaking a lot of these selection processes is absolutely, I think, going to change the way that companies interact and the way that individuals interact. And actually, you know, as a number of academics have observed, it's actually contracting that becomes the primary skill set. It's getting that engagement, making sure that commitments are put in place, that the obligations are understood and disseminated. That's going to be the critical component of business operations. And so to the extent that they survive, actually potentially sales and procurement become sub-elements of contracting.
Very interesting discussion point. And in fact, our old chief procurement officer, who's retired for the last year or so, was John Patterson. And he had this phrase, which is wireless procurement. And you can see the trend very quickly energizing towards that, because the buying process, the selling process, you have these sales and buying methodologies, you can pretty much replicate those in an automated fashion. And technology can do that today. So again, you can say to people, you can either put your head in the sand, but you will die if you do that. You're going to have to evolve and adopt your skill sets around a much more strategic level of the function and of what you do, either from a contracting perspective or from a buying perspective or even a selling perspective. And we can see some of that occurring already. We use our own tools internally for both the contracts on the buying side and also on the selling side. So when people put a quote out, they will automatically put the contract out there as well that has speed to move information straight away. So reducing the cycle time completely from on the customer engagement has an impact on revenue, obviously, very quickly too. So you can see that starting to emerge already. And this evolution really from on the contract side, just having a contract and just seeing your contracts and saying, tick in the box, thank you very much, I'm done, is very much evolved, I think, particularly over the last 2 years, where people are now saying, well, no, let me understand the contract design much more effectively, which is what you guys are doing. But let me try to understand how to automate the transactional element of that contract process via technology as much as I can. And as I said at the beginning, the issue has been the technology has typically struggled a wee bit to try to meet that demand. I think that time has now changed.
And product differentiation is increasingly hard to maintain and sustain, isn't it? And therefore, organizations are increasingly needing to differentiate through the nature of the commitments they're ready to make and the customization that they're prepared to offer in those commitments. So, you know, I want to choose from an array of different payment terms. I maybe want to choose from an array of different warranty options. So make that easy for me, make it understandable what your offering is, make it easy for me. I think the point about sales is really interesting. I've been reading quite a lot recently about the forecast of the death of yet another professional area, which is sales and marketing. With the point that, you know, today's generation coming through with obviously a social media then is no longer interested in talking to salespeople and is no longer interested in being marketed to. They don't believe what they're told, they don't trust what they're told. So we're seeing more and more reliance upon friends and personal recommendation. Oh, you bought one of those? How was it? Oh, I think I'll get one. Which again leads us to this environment where actually the more that you eliminate the people who aren't trusted, probably the more effective you're going to be in the market.
I agree.
And you pick up on a point, and Kingsley, I'm quite keen to again get some input from you. Justin, you talk about the fact that the technology providers are behind the curve as far as our community is concerned, to a degree.
Historically, yes.
And I would generally agree with you on that point as well. But one of the other interesting points, and again, it came out of the conversation, the Google Hangout that we did last week with the graduates, that there are many global organizations who are still insisting on pen and ink signatures on contracts, and sending 1,000-page agreements across the world for a signature using a pen and sending it back again for a counter signature using a pen. So whilst we might have a go at the technology organizations for being behind the curve, actually there seem to be plenty of global organizations who are also behind the curve. How do we, in a world where we have media headlines saying my computer will see your computer in court, we're developing this idea that suddenly we're going to transition from pen and paper to computers going to court together. How do we close that huge gap?
It will take some time. I mean, the technology of contracting has lagged substantially behind the technology of litigation. And that's primarily because there is a more immediacy in the litigation space, that the demand for electronic data discovery was much higher, because once sued, companies had to respond, and they had to now bring technology to the table. This was never such a pressure in the case of contracting. It's more a matter of we can improve your processes, which is a harder sell than the immediacy of discovery review. But if you watch that process, which is very likely to be mirrored in the contracting space, and I would predict that while we saw an explosion of technology in the litigation space in the last 25 years, the next 20 will bring an equivalent explosion in the case of transactional. Yes, of course, there is human reluctance and resistance to this. Yes, of course, there are deep security concerns. But I do recall when I worked inside of a law firm, when email first was introduced, I literally had to, on behalf of the partnership, write to our clients and say, is it okay for our lawyers to send you an email? And at the time, there was just this enormous resistance to it. We've moved forward. Cloud computing is now available. It is secure. We have the emergence, potentially, of technology such as blockchain that will allow us to do secure computing across organizations. These are some way to go. But I think that it is an inexorable path. We may proceed ahead of complete assurance of security. I'm sure we will. But the resistance will slowly, essentially be reduced. But here the challenge is slightly different than the electronic discovery space, where you simply had to do it. Here we've got to show value. We've got to show that the technology can be implemented at less cost than the current solutions. If we can do that, we're going to start to gain an audience. But there's so many more benefits than simply cost reduction. So, I mean, I'll try and wrap this up quickly by saying that, yes, we will proceed. Yes, there will be concerns. We will overcome them.
Yeah. Justin, let's pick up on this issue of demonstrating value, because of course, that is absolutely key. And as Kingsley rightly points out, where there's no immediacy, then it's a harder sell. How do you demonstrate that value?
I think there's, particularly over recent months, there's been many, many examples of where visibility of the contracting process has been critical to a company's success or indeed potential demise. We only have to look at the news on a regular basis. I had a conversation with a chief procurement officer of an organization a few months ago who said, Justin, the cost avoidance element of this business case is difficult. This was shortly before he had a significant stock price impact to his organization from a supplier risk issue. Okay, so I think in terms of the business case and the drive for the adoption of these types of tools, it's a much, much bigger asset than perhaps just trying to make things a little bit quicker and more efficient and utilizing skills more effectively and a little bit of cost saving here. You really are talking about visibility of the contracting process, which if you don't have it, and you can't really understand the whole engagement process of who negotiated that contract, what was in that contract, how is that supplier or customer being managed, who is responsible for that, where is that contract in place elsewhere, if you can't show that from an auditability perspective, good luck. Because if something happens, and invariably will do, you can't prevent everything. If something happens in this world of social media that we're in today, you have a stock price impact that will completely demolish your company in the space of a few hours.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that is very much an area that we're sort of highlighting here to people, and it's real. You can see it in the news every week. Every week there's another news item which is saying that you need visibility on these areas here.
To me, one of the key points here is that organizations have invested mountains of money in streamlining their internal communications and operations. Enterprise resource planning systems, a multitude of applications. There's been this phenomenal investment because it's understood that the internal relationships within a company need to be streamlined and automated. That same realization has somehow not occurred when we're crossing enterprise boundaries, borders. And that really is the point. Contracts are all about the integration across enterprises, across organizations, across individuals. And it is so important that that communication is streamlined and enabled and facilitated. It's why there is so much inefficiency, because there isn't any structure to the way it's done. We don't even agree, to your point at the beginning, Kingsley, we don't even agree on industry standards for the way we're going to go about contracts. Every company does it their own way, and often every division within a company does it its own way. So no wonder the whole thing is confusing. And then if that wasn't bad enough, we decide to produce these instruments on paper, which by and large nobody really uses today, and using archaic language which virtually nobody can understand. So we create an environment in which the probability of failure is really high, which of course has traditionally been great news for contracts managers and lawyers, because then they're really busy solving the problems that they created. That's the challenge, in many ways. That's what we're looking at. That's what technology can transform. And it will, I think, quite rapidly, and is leading now, to much more fundamental questions that are saying, hold on a minute. The purpose of contracts is not about going to court. The purpose of a contract is to build understanding and to create an operational framework for the way that we're going to work and relate to each other. And I think we see example after example where contracts are increasingly about ethics, they're about integrity, they're about honesty, they're about transparency, and they're about clarity. So all of those are going to put very real pressure on a lot of the games that we're playing today, where we just get into the battle of the forms, nonsensical discussions about liabilities and indemnities and all the same old stuff that has virtually no relevance to real life, when what we should be doing is looking obviously at how do we construct arrangements that lead to success and reduce the probability of those failures.
But there are lots of organizations people who work in a world where they're comfortable with paper and ink signatures. And we often talk to him about the fact that you need a catastrophe. And again, to go back to the comment about immediacy, you need a catastrophe in order to create a seismic shift to create that change. Do you think that still holds true for technology in this field?
No, because I think as we see the emergence of technology, it's going to be so much more obvious the strength of the business case. It's going to yield real competitive advantage for organizations. And that, I think, is going to make it an unstoppable force. I know one or two of the companies you've been working with already recognized that this is a source of competitive advantage. It isn't a nice to have, it's rapidly becoming a must-have.
I mean, I have to agree. I mean, Tim, there's this absolute paradox that contracts are the economic lifeblood of businesses. They drive essentially their P&L. And yet, we don't see an enormous amount of intercompany effort to streamline this. And I think it's partly because of that. It's because companies do look internally, and it's much harder to establish those standards across businesses. The motivation, I agree with you, Tim, is absolutely there. And that's part of the reason why we pushed hard to try and establish contract standards. And indeed through a website called Contract Standards to try and make this plain, modern business English that can be accessible by all so that we can reduce the friction in the process. So yes, it may require a catastrophe, but there is an inexorable sort of movement forward towards these standards that I do hope will be adopted. It may take some time. It may take quite a bit of time, but the end is very predictable. That we will get to that point of standards. Doesn't mean that a good negotiator can still get to a better position than someone less trained in this space. And it doesn't mean that the management of these contracts and the relationships are automatically taken care of by the machine. But at least I think it's one of the things I listen to in this conversation is that we may be flipping some of our focus from pre-signature, which can likely be automated, to post-signature management. And even over my career, I've seen a transition from working on purchase-type agreements, where the relationship between the organizations was at the point of closing, and then we went our separate ways, to ongoing service-type relationships, where we have that relationship between the organizations going over a longer period of time. So we may see the shift, as I say, from pre to post-signature technologies.
And the good news, Kingsley, is Sally was telling me the other day that we're all going to be living to 135. So even if it doesn't take a little time, we'll still be here to see it.
I hope so. It may take us that long to see this.
I do hope not.
No, I don't think it will, in all honesty. I think we'll see it over the next 5 to 10 years.
And I think I would add that certainly what I've seen is within the organizations, they know that they need to have a contract management solution or help in technology to be able to support the process. So there's no doubt about that. The vision's always been there. I think people really struggle to, how do I get started?
Yes.
And one of the things that we see is when you have to, by necessity, for the contract process, include a whole bunch of people, whether it's legal, whether it's HR, whether it's IT, whether it's sales, whoever, all these people. And if you add all the requirements for all of these individuals together, all of a sudden this monolith starts being built in front of you in terms of the business case. It just sort of evaporates away as a consequence. It gets into a too hard box. So I think people are still out there trying to figure out a way that's sort of cost effective to say, right, how do I start? Yeah. And I think that's a challenge which I think the profession has across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely right. And some of the big success stories we've seen is, it's very simple. You take it in bite-sized chunks. Actually, you start small, and then as the successes are achieved and realised, then you start to spread it out, and that's where the successful implementation that we've seen, have really taken hold. So we've had a couple of comments, and I'm just keen to make sure that we capture these. So first of all, thank you to Sarah Farden for her tweets. Thank you very much for that. So Robin Phillips has asked, I'd like to progress towards more e-based contracting, but need to ensure that as an early adopter, the appropriate governance checks are in place. So Robin has 2 questions. Following the Hangout, would it be possible to provide some examples of contract management technology software which are in use at the moment? And do any MOOC participants have practical experience contract management solutions. Well, Justin, I feel duty bound to come to
Yes.
this one.
So yeah, I mean, there's the contract management platforms are there's quite widespread. There is good contract management software out there. A lot of it now is moving towards on cloud as people feel more comfortable with the security aspect. We touched on that today, but that's a massive focus for organizations, including ourselves, for cyber threats and security and data retention. So the move is towards much more cloud-based solution that people can access it. The old mobile procurement piece as well, and the mobile contracting piece, that people can do approvals on the fly without having to be in the office. Hence my point earlier around this being adopted far wider than a small group of people that currently is. So there's a number of organisations out there that can do a job. We use our own software internally, both on the buy side and indeed the sell side. And that's proved very beneficial for us in a number of areas, not just cost savings, but also revenue recognition, and time to revenue as well,
yeah.
Going back to that competitive advantage point. But there's a number of people like Gartner and Forrester that can advise on technology. I wouldn't want to put a play on here for our technology, but there's a number of people in the marketplace that can do this. I think what you have to be careful of when you look at these type of technologies is certainly the area of scalability.
Yes.
As you add numbers of contracts in, that could be challenging. Yeah, so you've got to have the right horsepower to be able to identify that. And again, it's looking at that future area around sort of predictive areas and utilizing easy-to-use solutions. So user interface is very, very important to get adoption.
Yeah.
And if people haven't got a plan on that or have one in place already, that's going to be a struggle to adopt within the organization. So yeah, it's a very exciting time for the technology providers if they're doing those things: security, volume and scalability, the robustness of application, and experience in being able to deploy these. Going back to your point, Sally, start small, get some value quicker.
And I think one of the important things to point out as well is that there has been a huge emergence of organizations, technology organizations, who can support the smaller enterprises as well. I think originally a lot of the contract management systems, it was felt that they were only available for big multinational organizations. But I think, Kingsley, is that your view as well, that in fact this technology is now already a lot more affordable and a lot more available for small to medium enterprise, for example, as well?
I agree the technology's there, but your earlier point absolutely resonated with me, which is that, and what we're seeing in the marketplace is that I think businesses do know, large and small, that there's great advantage to be had from the technology, but this point of where do we start, what are the issues we need to tackle, what are the available solutions, and I think it is, the other piece of the puzzle is, and I think it's going to be a great service of the IACCM, is that yes, the technology is out there, but I think it probably needs to be wrapped in some kind of services to be able to walk people through the process and to give them some of these business cases, business examples of how others have done it. And I think through that they can see essentially how they might apply it to themselves. But given the fact that, as you put earlier, that people still would like to use the pen, and we see this enormous transition coming, I think that this lack of awareness, this lack of information, is itself helping the inertia and the resistance to change. And I think it is, and it's for us, and I'm sure for all other participants in here, this helping the corporations, our potential clients, better understand this, and us, quite frankly, being better able to explain the process. I mean, I must admit, we struggled with that, is to show the benefits and how we're going to progress through it. And this is the reason why I welcome this kind of discussion, because I think it is an exchange of information. We're all very skilled in our own area. Now, how do we come together and combine our experiences to develop these great solutions? But absolutely, the technology is there. I think the awareness, the education, and the implementation processes, I think probably, because we're relatively early on, can be refined and better communicated into the marketplace.
couldn't agree more.
I think from the association point of view, one of the biggest challenges we see is that because this has not traditionally been viewed as a business process,
Yeah.
Contracting is a life cycle activity from the inception of a potential need or opportunity right the way through to its closeout, either successful or unsuccessful. That's a pretty long life cycle, as you highlighted, Kingsley, in many cases, although in others, of course, it's very transactional and very brief. It may be a trade, or in the financial markets, which takes a millisecond.
Yeah.
So we have a tremendous range of life cycles. But in most organizations, they've not thought of contracting in a process context. And because they haven't thought of it that way, there's been nobody who's been accountable for effectiveness and quality, and therefore there's been a complete absence of leadership in really mapping out what is our vision, what is our goal, what outcome are we seeking from a better contracting process. And one of the big focus areas for us at ICCM goes back to actually what you talked about, Kingsley. It is about leadership and influencing skills. We are working very hard now with our membership around really looking at imbuing and developing those qualities of leadership and influencing, because we know for sure from executive discussions there's a level of frustration at the executive level about why isn't what happening, and at the bottom there's a lot of scratching of heads saying, well, what do they want to happen? Maybe I could substitute the pen with electronic signature. Is that what they want? But of course it isn't. There's a massive divide there in thinking.
Yeah.
We have to fill that gap, and that's very much what we see the job of the association in doing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and needing to draw this to conclusion now. But I think yes, Kingsley, Tim, and Justin, picking up on all the things you've said, it does require us to focus on supporting those initiatives, and as you rightly say, the education around all of the possibilities as well, and the fact that this is and the technology now doesn't need to frighten people. It's very available, as you say, Kingsley. It's there. It just requires some guidance around it, I think, is probably the summary there from my perspective. Thank you all very, very much indeed for being involved today. Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much, Kingsley, and thank you, Justin. Obviously, if any of you have any other questions that you want to pose, then please do. We have one very quick last question. You guys mentioned setting up standards in relation to contracts. Wouldn't you say the public sector may have existing standards that regulate their procurement, etc., in comparison to the private sector?
Oh my goodness! Now you throw. Of course they do.
That's a big question.
That's why a lot of projects fail, because they're standard. They're one-sided. They don't really take any account of the reality of business environment. They try and impose all of the risk onto the supplier. They therefore generate a blame culture. Apart from that, they're great.
Just quickly picking up, what's your view on standards? Obviously, that's an area that you're very keenly focused on right now. So,
well, absolutely. I mean, I think there is much to be learned from the public sector. But I mean, certainly speaking from the U.S.-centric world, despite my accent, I am based in the U.S. Yeah, we have standards as policies, but we don't have actual standards as contracts. So someone does need to essentially translate this from public policy to actual contracting themselves. But I would say, in answer to the question, standards can be drawn from many places. Yes, public, but also private practices. And I think that's, in some ways, I think I'm now putting an academic hat on. Part of what we're doing here is almost the identification from the standards from practice. It's a bit like pulling out the common law from the way people actually do things. There's much to be learned across the market space. We've just got to be able to capture them, communicate them, and build in all the necessary variants. But we're also going to build in the metrics to be able to determine when those standards deliver business value. That's going to be the ultimate arbitrator. We are talking about the marketplace. And so that will be the ultimate tool that we'll be using. But yeah, we should draw from everything. I mean, for example, in the US, we've made available I think it's about 1,600 credit card agreements. It's not particularly helpful in, creating a standard. They're all there. You can look at them. But wade your way through 1,600. I think you'll just be confused by the end and find examples of everything.
Coming up, at least you've got a couple of days to do it.
And what a lovely way to spend Thanksgiving.
Jermaine, thank you very much for that thought-provoking question. All right, we'll wrap this up now. As I said, to any of the audience, if you do have any questions you want to pose, then please continue to do so through FutureLearn. Remember the hashtag FLContracts. But thank you again. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Kingsley. Thank you, Justin, very much indeed. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.